All right, as we know, it's all new. But hopefully, based on the classes we've done, based on the class, we've isolated the documents that have been modified or new documents and sent them out, that everyone here is taking some time and studying up on this stuff. Because I think you're much better off when you start utilizing this. A lot of us have probably not even done this yet. We haven't had the opportunity to do so. You don't want to practice on your clients. That holds true with any of our documents, the listing agreement, the purchase agreement, the buyer rep agreement. You don't want to practice on your clients. Practice with yourselves. Read the stuff, because everything you need to know is in the documents. In that spirit, keep in mind this too. The real estate hasn't changed at all. We're all saying, oh my God, it's a whole new world. It's not. The only thing that's changed is the manner in which you are paid. The math itself is the same for all parties concerned in most cases. Okay. And this is just an update on everything that's going on. August 12th at night, they're going to flip the switch. So starting August 13th in the morning, when you wake up in the morning, sipping that coffee, all this stuff's going to be in effect. There'll be no compensation data in the MLS. It's going to be stripped out of it. They will not be facilitated in any manner by MLS. Do not try to slip them into the agent remarks, because they'll catch it. The concessions data fields, the ones that you use when you close a listing, like did you offer any credits or concessions, that's going to be removed. So you're not going to be able to even go back to see what concessions were paid. So there really will be no history other than your own. Okay. And the MLS rules have been modified. So you can't, obviously, to prohibit compensation in any of the feeds, MLS data feeds, for example, you probably know that Zillow and Redfin and virtually all the real estate brokerages are fed by the MLS. And this also includes other websites. If you're on a website with another brokerage posting things, you might be breaking some rules here and you'd be subject to a fine. So we get this, it's the way it is now.
So no more private remarks like it was for a week last week, or that you could put in the seller was willing to, concession up to 2.5%.
That remains. That's different. And we're going to get into that.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, no, thanks for the question. I appreciate it. Don't hold back. Actually, Corey, you can hold back. Everybody else don't hold back. Just kidding. All right. Before we do that, has everyone had a chance to really look through the new residential listing agreement? And are you aware that it's changed pretty substantially? I'm going to guess some have and some haven't. So guess what? We're going to do that today. It's 19 pages, the residential listing agreement bundle. We're not going to go through each section in detail. I'm going to briefly go through it, but I want you to take a look at it so you can have your eyes on it. And when we're done here, if you haven't done so already, I need you to kind of to look through it and see what it is. So when you're explaining it to your potential sellers, you're not practicing on them. All right. First part of the bundle is just like it is, the disclosure AD, right? Agency disclosure. Okay. I'm going to get myself a little spotlight here too. Okay. All right. Then we get into the listing agreement itself. It is now set up in a grid format, just like the residential purchase agreement has been for a while now, just like the buyer rep agreement is in its newest version. See that? And it's broken down into pieces. Basically, all the terms that the seller is going to agree or disagree to is up front. It's not spread throughout the agreement like it has been. Starting with the first part, representation, how long the listing agreement's for, what's the listing price, right? Everybody knows you need a beginning and an end date for anything to be effective. Second part, if it's a specific listing like a manufactured home, or if it's a probate, whatever, just click that there so we're all aware. Third part is compensation. We've gone through this in the class. And we've also gone through this after the class. Compensation section is really small now. 4 pieces. The first piece is the percent that you agree with the seller that they're going to pay the listing side only. Okay, let's call that 3% here. The second part Someone explain to me, what is an unrepresented buyer and why would this second part be here? Corey.
For the listing agent to possibly represent the buyer coming in for an additional percentage.
Yeah, only if the buyer's unrepresented. If a buyer walks in, let's say to your open house and says, you know, I'd like to buy this house, but I don't want any damn real estate agents anywhere near me. Right?
Right.
You guys can write the contracts, do all that, but I don't want representation. And this happens once in a blue moon, but it happens. So a buyer broker agreement is going to be ineffective. You're not going to get paid by that buyer, are you?
But you're doing more work.
Yeah, you're doing all the work. So you want to make sure ahead of time the seller knows, hey, if a buyer comes in, we're going to have this like a buck and pony and a pin, and he's going to be going all over the place. I'm going to keep him under control, and we're going to get through this transaction. And for that, I will charge you, you know, 2.5%, 3%, 2%. Put something in there. Otherwise, you won't get paid for it.
Good idea.
This same continuation, same thing as before. You know, once the listing expires or it's canceled, if any buyers have come through the property, if they decide to purchase it within that continuation period, you want to make sure that you're eligible to be compensated for that. Same thing. Okay, the next section, inclusions, exclusions. Okay, it's just a little more clear, a little easier to figure out. Okay, includes leased items, liened items. And while we're looking at leased and liened items, this comes up once in a while, and it just came up recently. Like with solar panel, a lease, the buyers at the end are saying, whoa, what about this? I'm not going to pay this lease. 10 days before close. This stuff has to be addressed up front. Now you're going to provide them all the stuff, the leases and everything, but their agent isn't always going to tell them that, hey, by the way, you're taking this over. They're saying, no, rip it out. I don't want it. This kind of stuff happens. Take it over. I've seen deals almost fall apart over leftover propane in a rented tank. Seller says, I own that propane.
Washer and dryer.
Buyer, you can pay me for it. By the way, I'm going to charge you a premium if you want it. Okay. That was just a little diversion there. Okay, the MLS public marketing. Okay, it's just been moved down to the grid. Okay, this is all the same stuff as before. Timing of offers, the love letters, yes or no, reports, exceptions. Is the seller going to have a contingency that they have to purchase a replacement property as a contingency in any RPA? Okay. Opt-outs said, so I don't want a key or lockbox. I don't want signs, etc. Hopefully that never happens, but it does. Now that's it. That's all the stuff you fill out on the listing agreement. Kinda. On this agreement itself, that's all you fill out, but there's more. And the stuff that goes beyond this, keep in mind the BCA, broker compensation advisor, is automatically included in the bundle, checked off, and you can't uncheck that. But it goes into, it explains what compensation is. You're going to see nothing in here about co-op compensation, just how it works. But it's been moved away from the terms, just like the RPA. Keeps on going. Compensation goes for a while. Exclusion. It's just explanations of what they've already agreed or disagreed to. Okay. Keeps on going. Keeps on going. Okay. Then they sign it. You sign it. Bam. Now, I sent a video / email a while back on form MLSA. We're going to go through that briefly. I've already gone through it. The terms that are important, we're going to go through it again briefly. It's attached to the listing bundle and is required to be included with the listing agreement. You'll notice it's not a notice. It's not an advisory. It's an addendum. There's stuff in here that's binding. And there's stuff in here they have to check and agree, disagree, or modify. Okay. First off, this form here, it takes a lot of the language that was on the prior listing agreement and it just moves it here. Anything about the MLS has been removed from the listing agreement and added into this addendum. So it kind of just gives it its own island. What's an MLS, the benefits, etc., so on and so forth. Okay. Then we get into the stuff that needs to be filled out. For example, in the public marketing of the property. Okay. Does the seller by default they do authorize the broker to market this incoming soon status. If they don't want it to be done that way, you check here. They do not. Okay. By default, the seller instructs you to market it at the beginning of the listing period, like right now. As soon as we sign up, you got 3 days, get it on the MLS. But they say, whoa, I don't know. No, we got to do some stuff first. We got to do some repairs and mow the lawn and paint, all that, right? So you check it off here. Seller instructs, just like the old listing agreement, except it's on this form. When is it going to be done, right? And what form goes, if it's not going to be put in right away, what's the form that gets included here? They sent to the MLS. Anyone? What, say that again?
The SELM.
Yeah, the SELM, SELM. Okay. That's important. You don't want to get dinged on that. You're thinking, how are they going to know? Well,
Hey, Mike, quick question.
Yeah.
So it's coming soon default. They either say I don't want it or it defaults to coming soon is okay.
it defaults to it's okay.
Okay.
Okay. Now this, it says, I don't want you to market to the public at all. This is a pocket listing. All you get, and there's rules. And in a future meeting, we're going to review those rules of cooperation, but not today. We don't have the time today. But if they say, don't market to the public at all, I just want you and people you know to market it. Well, you got to use the SELM for that too. There's also a form that the MLS provides. It's similar to a SELM. That's okay too. Some of our TCs use that one. Some of them use the SELM. They both have the same effect. Okay. I don't care which one you use, but this is one of them. Okay. And the seller understands and agrees that any public marketing, let's say that you say, well, we're going to wait till the end of August, but let's say the 15th of August, you run a Facebook ad. All right. Within one business day, that's got to be in the MLS. You can't stop, and you can't go backwards once that's in the MLS. Okay. Section F, clear cooperation does not apply. Just ignore that. It doesn't, it's NA for our MLS. Okay. This, it's in there to sell by default. Seller says, yeah, make it available to the internet sites, which means syndicate it out. Let Zillow see it. Let Realtor.com see it. Let KW.com, ColdwellBanker.com. All of them are going to see my listings. Yeah, by default. But I don't want certain things to be seen. Well, there's a form SELI. If they don't want those certain things to be seen, or they don't want to be syndicated at all. Okay. That's an option form. Most aren't going to take that option, but some do. Now, it does talk a little bit about seller concessions on this form. So read and study this piece, because this is what your clients are going to see. It explains what a concession is. Okay. Now, concession, you can't just say in a contract, direct it to commission. A concession is a credit to the buyer, and they use it in a way they deem fit. Okay. That's what a concession is. We're going to get into a little bit later about the difference between a concession and SPBB, which we've gone over before, but we're going to review it in a very simple manner. You'll see. Okay, as it says here, must be allowed to be used for any permissible buyer expense or costs. Must not specify the concessions are to be used for broker compensation. Okay, just understand this. By default, which means this is the way it's going to be unless they agree to do it otherwise, the seller does not authorize you to put concessions in the MLS. Does not. However, if they say, yeah, go ahead, I want to just get this done, check this box. All right. And basically you could put in the agent remarks, since we don't have that field in our MLS, the seller is willing to consider offers asking for concessions. Okay. Not saying I'm going to, I'm willing to. We're going to get into the how binding that is when we get into our review in a minute. Okay. Even if permitted, no amount of the concession will be put in the MLS. You cannot put 2.5% unless the seller notifies you in writing of that amount, in writing. How would you do that? Well, you can put it on an addendum to this thing. They can send you an email. My preference is to put it in an addendum, because there's no place in here for that to exist.
So you're saying that even if that box is checked, you're asking for a whole nother handwritten acknowledgement from the seller that that is what they want, correct?
Only if you want to put in a specific amount.
Okay,
If you just put concessions, which I'm gonna guess a lot will do that way. If you're gonna put in concessions, then you no, you don't need them to check that. But, or you don't need, I'm sorry, you do need to check that, but you don't need to have the additional piece of paper. If you say, I want to put in 2.5%, we're gonna get more views. Seller says, sure, that's great. Well, stick it on an addendum. Worst case, they can give you an email, but that's, I prefer to do things contractually. Okay. Then it gets into the photographs rules, right? By default, visitors can take pictures all they want if they visit the property. Or they might say, hey, I want you to put in the MLS that no photos, unless you're, no extra photos unless you're an appraiser or an inspector for privacy. Now, some of you may not have been aware this stuff was in the old listing agreement if you haven't done a lot of listings. But I'm going to say it again, and I could say it all day long. And I hope it gets through to a lot that aren't already doing this. I know a lot of you are. You have got to know this stuff like the back of your hand. Can't stop a presentation. And worse than that is give the wrong information to your client. All right, so that's that. Then we have the normal things, seller's advisory. Broker compensation advisor. We've gone through this. Basically, it tells the seller about how it works for them on broker compensation. Same with the buyers, and it states how the buyer would get paid. This is the only document that's going to talk about seller paying the compensation. Okay. So make sure you understand this, because this is given to your sellers and your buyers, and they're going to read this, I believe. I would hope they do. And you don't want them to know more about it than you. You got to be able to explain the whole thing. You don't want to be giving instructions to your eye doctor when LASIK surgery. Hey, I went on Google and it said that doesn't work.
Yeah, my guy this afternoon I'm doing this with is an eye doctor.
Okay, well, you can use that on him then. Okay, the dual agency is still in there, of course. Fair housing, blah, blah, blah. All of these. And that's it. That's the listing bundle. That's the new one. Like I said, if you haven't taken the time to do it, study it. Then the best way to really learn this stuff, the agreement, the listing and the purchase agreement too, if you're a newer agent, just print one up and fill it out by hand. Don't do it on zip forms, because you just tab through. Fill it out by hand. It's going to force you to say, what is it that I'm signing? What is it that I'm agreeing to here? What is it that I'm being asked to? That's the fast track way to learn any document. All right. Let's get out of this. And we'll get into this.
Quick question on the SLEM. So if we go coming soon, like typically on a Monday, we'll have to have an SLEM form attached to the listing agreement if we're going live on that next Thursday.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
the easiest way to do it. Okay. And last week, I sent out some forms that were developed by our attorneys at BRLG. Some of you may never have an opportunity to use it. Some will. But the new in-house forms, and I gave I think a fairly clear explanation, but I want to give a little bit more of a thorough explanation of these forms while I've got you all here in front of me. If you have any questions on it, you can ask now. Okay. These are the forms, the modification of terms of listing agreement, which is the seller offering to compensate the buyer's broker, basically co-op commission. Okay. And then the second form is the one that puts that together, which is just like our CBC that we've had forever, right? But it's obviously designed for these real estate rules, payment rules, if you will, not real estate rules. Purpose of those forms, it'll accommodate any seller who goes into a listing agreement before August 12th with the new listing agreement. They want to offer co-op commission at least till August 12th. At least till August 12th. Okay. They don't want to feel, because there's nowhere to put it on the new listing agreement. They say, I want to take advantage of that. I think it's a good thing. That's the first purpose of it. The second purpose, it allows for a listing to provide co-op commission beyond August 12th. And I'll say it again, you cannot mention co-op commission anywhere in the MLS. You can put it on your stuff, your website, You can say it all day long. You can send out email blasts, anything you want, but. And I think where this will go, you know, is because it's an efficient process, is when you do get an offer, and if you get a call ahead of time, which hopefully agents are calling you ahead of time when they send an offer, but a lot of times they don't. Say, hey, this is how we're doing commission here. We're going to offer a co-op commission of 2.5%. So I've got this document, which is the second document, and that's going to firm up your commission. So there's no need to ask the seller. Or if they do ask the seller to pay the commission, then you're going to counter back with this form, with this document, with not the first document, but the second one. You'll see.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
So let's say, you know, I've got a listing. The seller is willing to co-op up to 2.5%.
Mhm.
It's a super hot listing. I've got 5 agents that want to write an offer. Do I tell them, yes, it's 2.5%? Do I say the seller will consider concessions, but has not authorized me to share what amount? Ask for what you feel is best for your negotiation position, right? Because what if somebody says, well, we want you to co-op 1%? Then that's all the seller has to pay if that's in their buyer broker agreement, their buyer rep agreement.
That's a great question. First thing is that.
And wouldn't, you know, would it be, if I said, yeah, it's 2.5, if I was a buyer's agent, I'd modify my buyer's compensation agreement immediately to 2.5 if it was 2.
Yeah. Yep. Good question. However, this form, it's basically, they're paying you 2.5% more to, and the contractual obligation you have is that you're offering that 2.5%. So you can't say up to 2.5%. It's 2.5%. It's just like it is now. You can't do this, even though that's not in the MLS. And technically, if the buyer doesn't even know, you can say, well, what are you guys going to ask for? 2%. Okay. Now you could go back and modify this to 2% with your seller, but you can't have this in existence and then only pay 2%. And then what's going to happen to the other 0.5%? There's no mechanism on here where that other 0.5% reverts back to the seller or to the listing agent. It's the idea of it is it works just like the co-op commission now, and it's like saying it's a set amount. And yeah, it may differ from what they have. You might have the other thing. The seller might say, I'm only going to pay 2%, and they've got an agreement for 3%. And you're saying, and they might come in and say, sure, great, I'll go with that 2%, but I'm also going to ask for another percent on the RPA. I'm going to ask for another 1%. I want my 3%. I mean, there's all those little things can happen, but this is basically, it's a set amount. It's designed to sort of, you know, be a similar vehicle to what we have, with the exception it can't be advertised in the MLS, because part of the purpose of it is to allow you to tell other agents, hey, we're offering 3%. Come on, bring them by. Versus the concessions, whereas, well, the seller may consider, you never know, which is kind of what the MLS does. Okay. And going into it, the first document, all right, hopefully you've all opened your emails that I've sent and read through this. Okay, part 1 of that form is an advisory. It just says what's happening here, an advisory. The main points of that advisory, co-op, it's going to say in here that, you know, it might be more attractive to a buyer because they don't have to deal with it. It's like, okay, we got that firm set. And it may increase the buyer pool by making them more confident in writing the offer. Second big point, co-op commission is more efficient because you're only dealing with it. You're not dealing with it all over the place. You're not negotiating for it. It's like, this is what we're going to offer. That's it. Just like in the MLS, if you see a 2% commission, you know, are you going to not show? Yeah, you should show all the properties, of course, but it's going to make the buyer more comfortable. And if the buyer says, okay, they're offering 2%, that's great, but I have a BRCB or BRBC for 2.5%. You may elect we prefer you try to negotiate that 0.5%, because that's, if you can't, we got to do commission exception form. But if that's all you're going to get, buyer has nothing, you can modify your buyer broker agreement. But be careful about modifying this backwards. If that equation with Mark's very good question come up. Okay, the second part of this form after the advisory. Okay. This is what modifies the listing agreement. Keep in mind this too. The listing agreement is going to be stripped. It's stripped. This modifies the new listing agreement. Okay. If you have the old listing agreement and they're only going to offer a co-op till the 12th, you don't have to do anything except for that DMLA, which we'll talk about in a minute. All right. This states the amount the sellers, this is on there. The only thing you put in is a number, 3%, 2.5%, whatever they were willing to offer the buyer side. Okay. Now, we're going to be very careful to tell your sellers what you have to offer in co-op. And talk to, Paul might have some thoughts on this too, because this is basically an option form, is not required, right? And to say, if you don't, you got to get 2.5%, or it's an office policy, So I'm going to leave that one alone myself. And I'm going to, that's an inter-office decisions on that sort of thing. But anyway, you put in what they're going to charge. Should the BRBC be a lower number, seller pays the lesser amount. That's built into the form. That kind of answers Mark's question. So if the BRBC says 2%, this says 2.5%, okay, Mark, you got it. This will automatically be lowered. It doesn't mean that the money goes anywhere. It just means it's lowered. Okay. The total compensation that the seller is obligated to is the amount on the listing agreement plus the amount that's agreed to on this form. I had a couple of questions on that because I sent that out last week. Just a very, very, very quick example here. Okay. On the residential listing agreement itself, the new one under compensation. Okay. All you do here is put in the 3%, the 2.5%, whatever you negotiate to the seller side. Don't do anything else on the listing agreement itself. Just that, your portion. Okay. On the new agreement, you're going to add to your listing agreement. Okay. You're going to put in that 3% there, if that's what they're offering, or 2.5%, whatever it might be. Simple terms, RLAC1 plus the amount here is the total commission offered by the seller. I'll specify it even more. That 3% plus that 3% equals total commission. Any questions on that? Okay. Albert Einstein, my favorite quote by Albert Einstein is, you don't really understand something unless you can explain it to your grandma. So I try to make this as if I was explaining it to my grandma. So that's how you want to do with your clients. Okay. One more thing. Don't forget, if you do add this form to the RLA, when you're executing the RLA, check this, add it in. Okay. If you add it later, then obviously you're not going to go back and check a document that's already been executed, right? All right. That's how it would look. Big note, only use this form, only do this if the seller agrees to pay buyer broker a co-op commission. If not, then don't use this form. You could introduce it as an option. And I especially like the part where it becomes more efficient. You're not going to be haggling with commissions. Because if the seller's offering less than the buyer broker agreement, well, and that's it, that's their bottom line, then the buyer's agent's got a problem. They got to do it. They either got to reduce it or something else. Get grandma to pay for it. All right. Now, very briefly, the second form we sent. Okay. This is very simple, very, 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 very simple. It's a contract that obligates the seller broker, which is the listing agent, to pay the buyer broker the agreed upon co-op commission, okay? Works just like CBC. It's the simplest damn form you could imagine. All you do is put in the amount and sign it. Everybody signs it and you got it. That means you're obligated to, and keep in mind, you're obligated to pay it from your commission that you will get should, you know, once the thing closes. Okay. All right. There's a lot of information that's been covered in the last month, 2 months, 3 months. And so what we're going to do, I think the expectation is that everyone has paid attention, took notes in these presentations we've done, and that you've read through the documents. I sent the bundle out, so on and so forth. So we're going to see, Arnella, please don't hesitate to speak out. If you don't have the right answer, but you think you know the right answer, there's no judgment. Please speak up. I'd like to see participation on this. So I'm just going to just test understanding on this stuff for fun. Okay. Q&A. First question, what's the maximum time for a BRBC contract? Maximum time you can have it for?
3 months.
3 months.
Got it. What if I write it for 3 months in 1 day?
It's invalid.
You'll have to get an extension.
Yeah. Don't make it for 1 day more. Make it for 3 months. Don't do 90 days. In fact, I don't think you can do 90 days anymore. It's dates to dates. Okay. What's the maximum time for that extension?
3
90
months.
days.
3 months. Yeah. How many extensions can you write? What's the limit?
Unlimited.
Definitely.
You sure?
2 years.
No limit, but you can only do one at a time. You can't like pre-write them and say this will kick in 3 months. That one will kick up in 6 months. Just do them at the time. What if the buyer doesn't want to sign a full-on BRBC? I just want to look at 1 or 2 properties. I don't want to I don't want this long-term contract with you guys. What if they don't? What's their option?
Sign it for shorter for the amount of time it'll take to see those 2 properties.
Yeah, but it's too binding. This is too binding to me. It scares me. It's 13 pages of stuff.
Then use the non-exclusive one.
Well, non-exclusive is an option on the BRBC.
It's the default option, right?
Well, there's a section in there where you can specify specific properties to see, and the contract will be valid for those specific properties only.
You could do that, but they still might get
That's
scared
right,
about
the
13 pages.
PSRA.
Do you remember the form, PSRA, Property Showing Representation Agreement? It's a limited agreement. It's designed for just that situation. PSRA. It's designed for if you're holding an open house, they want to write an offer on that property, but they don't want to have any other stuff. That's it. You got to sign that. Or if you want to, they want to see 1 or 2 properties and that's it. They want to do a test run before they sign anything. They do that. Don't forget that form. It exists, and I suspect it's going to be used a lot more than we think. So
So
get
we
to know
probably
the
bring
form.
up the open houses.
It'd probably be smart to bring some.
All right, ready?
Bring those to open house.
What makes that PSRA a limited type agreement for those who are familiar with it? What makes it a limited agreement? I gave you the answer a minute ago.
The time frame.
Well, yeah, all that. You can see it provides for a maximum of 3 houses. That's it. It's got to be, it's the 30-day or less contract. Some people are going to do it for 2 days. Are you going to turn them down? I want to see this house, this 1.5 house. And I don't want to sign anything, but I'll do this and I'll pay you if you do it, but I'm not going to sign anything else beyond that. Are you going to say no? If they say, I just want a 2-day contract?
No.
Hell no. Right? It's non-exclusive only. And there's no real protection period, but there kind of is. And I'll show you that.
Hey, Mike, but
yeah.
what if, for example, somebody comes in and they say, yeah, I'd like some, I want to go see this, but let's say they did sign a buyer broker agreement with another broker, and that broker reviewed all the inspections, sent them an email, said, hey, I've looked at this, I previewed the house for you. Don't they have broker involvement at that point?
Yep. And that other broker is entitled to be paid for that if you write an offer and it closes. As
That's
long as
what I
it falls
thought.
within that protection period, yeah.
So if we do something like this, we've really gotta really vet the buyer.
Yeah,
You know, you get one of these buyers that says, "Oh, I don't want to be attached to anybody," but they, let's say for example, they went through all this and they were planning on looking at it with Kent, but then Kent said, "You know what? I've had a family emergency. I can't go see it, but here's all the work I've done." And now he's got broker involvement. And then they said, "Well, I can't see it with Kent." And then they just go to me. And then, so yeah, it's going to be the wild, wild west for a little
it
while, I
will.
think.
Yeah, but it's kind of like a listing agreement, that protection period. If there's leftover buyers that saw it before, they want to write an offer and the prior brokers, right? It's the same thing as the agent who's entering into this. Your responsibility is to say, okay, have you had a previous buyer broker agreement?
Yep.
Well, why do you ask? Well, I don't want to see you stuck with making 2 commission payments, because that's what will happen. That to me, if I'm a buyer, oh shoot, okay, yeah, I did. I worked with Kent, who, he took an extended vacation, but he did do all this stuff with me. And you're going, okay, so what? Okay, here's what you can do if that happens. If you're the potential buyer agent, they want to see it. Maybe they don't want to work with Kent. Okay. And if Kent's there, sorry to pick on you, but it's just like with a listing agreement. If you discover that a buyer who was on that list that the old listing agent provided, the most common solution is to connect with that agent, connect with Kent, say, Kent, I'm dealing with your buyer. Oh yeah, they're a handful. Yeah, well, yeah, I'm done with them though, but I did show them that house. So you work on a referral out with Kent, work out a 25% referral with Kent. And I've rarely seen that not work. I've seen it happen where they've held fast for more than 25%, but they obviously aren't going to work with that buyer. The only options they have are to hold firm to the full commission buyer, which means the buyer doesn't get the house, or B, at least collect 25% or so, and the buyer gets the house. But just be careful. Just make sure you ask. Just like you say, has this house been listed before? Even though you can look on the MLS and see, right? Say, did you have any buyers that did your old listing agent provide you a list? Oh, yeah, I did. I don't know where, but I'll tell you what, the reason I ask is because you could end up paying 2 commissions. I don't want that to happen, or I won't be able to represent you. So on and so forth. But yeah, there'll be some wild, wild west, but I think if we ask the right questions, that we can control most of that.
And if they ask us if they can go back and cancel, they can, right?
Yeah.
Their previous broker commission. But if you had buyer involvement, you're still stuck on that though, right?
Yeah. If there's broker involvement means broker involvement.
And it's a
that
30-day cancellation period. Right? It's 30-day notice of cancellation.
If it's exclusive, it's a 30-day
If it's
notice.
exclusive.
Yeah. And we're going to get into all that. You watch. We're going to get into all that.
So will we be asking buyers if they're under contract? I mean, that just seems like a normal question, just say.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have here's the thing. If the buyer's saying, I'm only going to do non-exclusive, they could have 4 active rep agreements going on. But they're only seeing, okay, with Rochelle, I'm going to check out Pacific Grove. All right. With Mark Cohan, I'm going to look at Carmel. With Scott, I'm going to look at Salinas. Okay. And so on and so forth. But as long as they don't intersect houses, they can do that. It's not a good idea, but as long and some may choose to do that, but they do that now. They do it now. And they're already, if they're working with 4 different agents, everything they see, okay, if I see a listing in Salinas, I'll call Scott, he'll show me. If I see one in Carmel, I'll call Mark, so on and so forth. And the difference is now it's kind of in writing and they can't cross over. And the only option you had before, when you've done a bunch of work and they end up writing with someone else, is you could use procuring cause. And that's procuring cause is really tough to prove, because the buyers are going to end up saying, I didn't feel that agent was going to represent me correctly, and I felt scared, and I couldn't use them, even though they helped me with that. And the agent's usually going to lose. In this case, you've got more ground to stand on if they're messing around and using all these different agents. This might keep them in line. Now, if one buyer is working with 4 agents have at-bats, right? But if one buyer's working with one agent, that reduces the amount of buyers. And then it's the same theory. You know, there's supposedly like 100 million leads generated through all the websites per year, but only 4 million sales. It's kind of like it just reduces that, kind of reduces the buyer pool in a way. But it enhances the loyalty because they don't want to get stuck. And it's going to depend, it depends on how you spin it. Okay. So I just gave you the answer on this. What's the max time for limited buyer representation? Max amount of time on the contract, the PSRA.
30 days.
Yes, good memory. Good short-term memory. Okay. Can you extend it?
Don't you do another one for another 30 days and you just keep doing 30-day back-to-backs?
No.
No.
Can you extend it? Is the question.
Yes.
Yeah. Just do just extend it out, just like you do the other one. However, you can do a new one when it expires if you want. But here's the thing, it's limited. And what you want to do, if they're going to go past 30 days, why not just do a regular buyer broker agreement? Why would they keep extending this one?
Right.
Just do a buyer broker agreement. This is intended for short-term, quick. The open house I want to write on, or that house I just saw on Zillow. I don't want to use the Zillow agent because it's just anybody that answers the phone that's going to help me. I like you. Can I see that house? And if I like it, I'll write an offer. It's kind of that sort of thing. Or I want to give you a test run. And if I like you, then I'll sign a BRCB or BRBC.
They sign a PSRA and, they decide that they kind of want to still work with you. Would the next conversation be to just talk to them about signing the BRBC?
Absolutely. And do it in the middle. Do it at any point. In 2 days, they might say, I'm going to switch over. You can do that. Okay. So on this PSRA, how long can you extend it for?
30 days.
Yeah, good. How many times? Now this is a question. How many times can you extend it? Technically.
Unlimited.
Yeah, there's no limit. Why would it? But it's kind of doesn't make sense if you keep extending this out. You can do a 30-day BRBC and keep extending that. That might make sense. 30 days, 30 days, 30 days, but this one, not as much. Okay, on the continuation period, right? What's a continuation period? It's like a protection period.
There isn't one.
Yeah, there isn't. But now there's a flaw in the document, I believe, and our attorneys believe it's there too. If you provide the notice of the buyers that have seen it with you, where you had broker involvement within the 5 days of cancellation or expiration, they may owe you compensation on that, even without a protection period. Now I'm thinking, well, what if it happens a year later? That's the flaw. They didn't limit that down. But it does state in there, if you provide this notice of this list of properties, they might still owe you compensation. So that'll make either they're going to come back to you and see it with you, or if they don't like you and they want to write with somebody else, that somebody else hopefully is going to ask that question, and then they're going to contact you, and you guys are going to work out a referral agreement.
So Mike, they are bound to you for the properties that they showed if you provide that document.
Yeah, for the properties that you showed, or the properties that you worked with them and had broker involvement. We're going to go through broker involvement in a minute. Yeah, you may be owed compensation.
So this is a good way of fishing out those people at open houses that pretty much are lying to you, right?
Yeah, yeah. Get this signed, this broker involvement. Because you did more than just, the Vanna White, here's the kitchen. Oh, here's this, that sort of thing. And you answer some questions and all that. And you now have, this provides you a representation agreement with your buyer, and you're in the house that they're interested in. It all just binds together. If you really look at it, get past the part negotiating money and stuff, this really provides a lot of protection for buyer agents now that did not exist before, unless you did a buyer broker agreement. Very few of you did. I know that. A few did, but very few of you did.
This prevents you showing houses for 3 days and then later on you find out they wrote it up with their aunt.
Exactly,
Las Vegas.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so get to know this form because you might use it more than you think. Okay, back to the BRBC. How much cancellation notice is required if they have an exclusive representation agreement?
30 days.
You got it. How about non-exclusive? How much notice?
None.
Unless you check the box and you put in a different number. I'd highly recommend when you're presenting this buyer broker agreement and they say, I want the default non-exclusive, right? That you give them the benefits of going longer than the 10 days. Say, you can fire me anytime. I have no problem with you firing me if you don't, if my services don't, meet or exceed your expectations. But I'd like to have at least, 20 days or 10 days or whatever many days to correct whatever it is that, I'm deficient with, something to that effect. But yeah, there is a way you can modify that. That's my point. How much time after the contract is expired or canceled do you have to turn in your list of properties with broker involvement?
5
much?
days.
7 days.
Yeah. How many days? Say that again.
7.
5.
I heard 7. I heard 5. Somebody, I need a third opinion.
3.
Yeah, it's 5 days.
5.
How about for a residential listing agreement? When does that do? How many days do they have for that? List of buyers.
5 days.
7.
5 days. Anybody else want to take a shot?
3.
I tell you what, if you don't get it on the day of cancellation or the day of expiration, that list is worthless. It's the day of with the
That day.
residential listing agreement. Yeah, that day. If it expires today, you get it to them no later than today, or it's no good. Very different than the buyer rep agreement. So don't forget that. It's happened. Okay. Now, how much time do you have after the buyer rep agreement to submit the form BFPI, the broker financial and personal information? How much time do you have after they sign it and say, okay, let's go?
It's 5 days by default.
5 days.
Yeah. Or you can do a different time frame. You could, it could be included today. You could give them, 80 days if you want. I don't advise that, but you could. What if the BFPI we just talked about, what if it shows the buyer's not qualified? They switched jobs 5 times in the last 6 months. They have, they're making a combined total of $45,000 a year. They're renting from their mom and getting a small bedroom in the back, whatever it is. Bankruptcy. What are your options? What are the options there? Oh, I
Sit
still
down
want
with them and execute a long-term plan. See if they'll follow it.
You could, yeah, I mean, that's a good customer relations for sure, because people buy sometime. I say, I want to start seeing houses now. It says right on here, you're gonna show me houses on this BRCB.
I've actually run into that with people that were expecting to receive a lump sum of a settlement where they didn't actually have the settlement money yet, but they wanted to go see properties.
Now that question on settlements is on the BFPI. Do you have any outstanding settlements, inheritances, anything? That'll show that they're not qualified now, but they'll be qualified later. Maybe.
Yeah, I guess it just depends. Why are they not qualified? And then you have to make a personal, professional decision at that point.
Yeah, because your option is you can cancel it if they're not qualified. You can just say, you can cancel it for any reason, but that's your only recourse right there. Either keep showing them properties or cancel it. There's nothing on there that says, I'm only going to show you properties after you're qualified. It's saying, I'm going to show you properties. So be cautious of all this. I mean, you should be asking your buyers now, have you talked with the lender? Yeah, let me work you over with Shane, yada, yada, yada. But this just really puts it very specific. What if the buyer refuses to sign one or submit one? Says, no, I'm not gonna, that's too personal. Not gonna do it.
You have the right to cancel.
You do. Or you can modify it forward and say, I need 30 more, if you want, you could, but it is mandatory with the BRBC. But you could cancel, or like you said, just keep working with them, but your obligation is to show them property, so be careful of that. I mean, if you can swing it to where, yeah, let's keep working on your credit score and build up some more down, yada, yada, yada. And, we'll just stay in contract with the BRBC and we'll show you an occasional property. Does that sound good to you? Sure. Something good comes up, there's that old saying, you never have to buy, right? You never have to buy, but you always have to look. You always want to look. Okay, the other form, BIPP, which is the buyer identification of preferences and priorities, which means they're narrowing down, what they're looking for in a home. When does that need to be submitted?
Also known as buyers are liars.
Did I hear something?
Nothing you want to hear, Mike.
That's right. Yeah. Nobody has a thought on that?
There's nothing you want to hear.
Yeah, probably not. What's he doing going through this stuff again? It's not mandatory. So there isn't. It's a form that exists, but it's used if you need to narrow down search criteria, but it's not a mandatory form. I say be kind of careful with it, because if you narrow it down too much, it could limit your ability to get paid later, especially if you have an exclusive agreement, especially. If you have an exclusive agreement, get paid no matter what.
Buyer involvement.
Yeah, so be careful.
Broker involvement, sorry.
All right, here we go. We're getting there. Who can cancel the BRBC and the PSRA, the limited and the regular one? Who can cancel?
Oh, people.
Either party, but
Either,
under
yeah.
different circumstances.
Yeah, or mutually, either one. All right, so if seller agrees to offer 2.5% co-op on that form we just talked about, where on the residential listing agreement does that go?
Nowhere.
Doesn't, nowhere.
You got it. Doesn't exist. Okay, remember that. Is there a form? This is an easy one that provides the co-op commission agreement between the buyer broker and the listing broker.
NTLA.
ML.
It's the new co-op broker agreement. It's form number 2. Form number 2. This is for co-op we're talking about. How do you prove, let's say you're a seller and you got a buyer with an offer, how do you prove the buyer even has a BRCB in place? I keep
Ask that it be submitted with the offer.
Request it.
Yeah, what it states in there is they can provide that portion of it that deals with compensation. You don't have to provide the whole thing. I'm gonna expect that'll change down the road, because it's like I can just create one and like fill out a fake income tax form to get a credit card. People do that. It's fraud, but people do it, so be cautious of that.
Would you recommend just submitting the whole thing in that case, just as common practice?
Just do what it says. The portion that deals with compensation. That's all that's asked for. But if a seller wants to see the whole thing, check with your buyer. Hey, he wants to see the whole thing. Are you okay with that? And this is email conversation, so you got it written writing. And they go, oh yeah, fine. I don't care. I just want to get this house. Then provide it. We've already had one offer that I'm aware of in the office, where the buyer broker did provide the whole thing.
Mike?
Yeah.
Let's say you submit an offer with the BRBC and the seller rejects the BRBC, does that nullify the offer at that time? Or how does that?
Well, if it's filled out incorrectly, but the seller wouldn't really reject that. All the seller would really have the ability to do is reject paying for something.
What I'm saying is you're expecting 2.5 and you write it up in the offer and you submit
You counter it. Yeah, because on the offer itself, this would just be like a you know, it's something that they could see that shows that they really have a contract with the buyer agent. So the number they're asking for is, you know, reasonable. So if the buyer asks, I want you to pay 3%, towards, you know, concessions or you pay the buyer broker commission. And, the seller can say, no, I'll counter back at 1.5.
Okay, so the
Since,
the
go ahead.
offer will be judged until that is resolved.
Because the reason we can do this now, before you couldn't touch commission at all on a contract, right? Now, because it's between the buyer and the seller, all the, you know, between the buyer and the seller only, they can counter back and forth on commission all day long, as long as it's not co-op commission.
But until that's resolved, they don't start looking at the offer and maybe countering the offer.
Right.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
So if on the addendum to the listing agreement, it says they will pay 2.5% as a co-op amount,
Mhm.
then they're technically obligated to do so, correct?
Kinda. If the buyer comes in and asks for 2%, then give them the 2%.
Pay the 2.
Pay the
Right.
2, but keep in mind that co-op commission that's left over, the 0.5% goes back to the seller.
Correct. And
That's-
if they
that's-
ask, and if there's a co-op commission for 2.5 and the buyer broker has an agreement for 3, they
Mhm.
can still ask for that extra half as
Yes,
part of the negotiation process in the offer.
yes,
And then the seller has the choice to say, no, I won't pay that, but they do have to pay the 2.5%.
right. And the seller also has the option to just counter back with an increased purchase price of that amount. So I'll pay the 3%, but you're going to pay this higher price. And I
Right.
guess there's a point to be made. The buyers have always paid the full amount of the house purchase. And from that full amount the buyer has paid comes the seller's commission, and the seller's okay with that. And in a sort of way, the buyer's always paid this commission, except it's been financed out for 30 years.
Right.
That's
It
right.
it just depends on where you put it on the net sheet. But the buyer's the one that's writing the check for this new purchase amount.
100%. 100%. If you can grasp around that and you can get your seller to see that light, and you can get your buyer to see that light, hey, Mr. Buyer, you've always been paying it, except it's always been financed. Let's finance it now. Let's just offer 3% more. Explain to them, this is why we're offering 3% more, is because of this commission. Or just, if you want to do the counter offer thing and don't want to tie it up right now and wrap it up, then offer 3% less. And then you wouldn't let the seller counter you back at 3% more. Say, I'll take it. But there's different ways of skinning the cat. But the main thing is what Mark just said. You've always paid it. The sellers have never written a check for commission, ever.
So I have a question. So say the seller has already, I have an agreement already before the change, right, for August 15th.
Yeah.
So the seller has agreed to 3%, 6%.
Mhm.
So wouldn't I want my seller to write in like 2.5% to help them?
Well,
Like-
right now, and if you have the old listing agreement where they're offering that amount of money,
Right,
it's already in the MLS, the co-op commission.
so you're
Now,
not,
one of the things you're going to do, and it has to be done, you can do it right now because it doesn't take effect until August 12th or August 12th at night, is all that's going to be stripped from the old listing agreement, stripped from the MLS. Your commission is going to be reduced from 5% to 2.5% because it removes it, right? Unless you do the new forms in which you can put it back in. So you can't offer, as a broker, you're not offering commission. The seller is offering maybe concessions. Okay. But just keep in mind, co-op commission is gone. It's not illegal. We can have it. We can do it. We can make it tell Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller. You've allowed us to have 2.5% commission. We'll make sure that we negotiate that with the agent, and we know you said that you're not going to do a dime more. And we'll go ahead and negotiate, tell the buyer agent, here it is. We'll have this executed, this new CBC, if you will, before you even turn in the offer if you want. We'll have filled out, signed by the seller, signed by the listing agent. Boom. If this property closes, co-op commission is paid. If the property doesn't close, then it's a worthless piece of paper. No co-op commission is paid. Just like the old CBC, which we didn't use very often because it was always in the MLS.
So I think the answer to my question is that get it signed up front.
Yeah. But keep in mind, and you're gonna all get reminders if you have listings right now, or if you have buyer broker agreements that are from the old version, you need to send in the disclosure modification, which is gonna be emailed to you again, and we're gonna go through it here today too, a little bit, what those are, what they do.
Hey, Mike, real quick question. I got an offer, we agree on a commission, concession, and for whatever reason, it doesn't appraise. Is that commission in play as a counter to get the price right?
Good question.
Only if it's made that way, only if the seller counters back that way or the buyer counters back that way. But it doesn't automatically adjust. If it's a percent, it'll adjust one way or the other. But let's say it's 2.5%. Let's say that equals $25,000. And the house appraises for $15,000 less, right? Or 10,000, whatever that number is. You have to negotiate price in order to meet appraisal, or the buyer's going to have to come up with extra cash to pay for that appraisal, to pay for that, that gap in appraisal, just like now. But my suggestion is with the sellers is say, you know what, we want to make sure we get full exposure with your house. We want everybody to show it. I don't care. Don't be closed-minded to commission, because the number that matters is the bottom line. So when we get an offer, if it doesn't appraise, or if it's lower than you think, don't mess around with the commission part. If it's agreeable at 2.5% seller credit or 2.5% on the SPBB, right? Which seller pays buyer broker directly. If it's that, just counter with price, up and down price. Tell the buyer to go down with price, up with price, however, to make it work. The buyer might say, if you have a seller and you represent the buyer, and the seller say, I'm not going to pay any because I'm at my lowest point right now, then tell the buyer, let's go at 2.5% more on price. But if it doesn't meet appraisal, we have the same problem that we always have. And the buyer, the agent can modify that if they're in agreement with that. But keep in mind, the buyer is obligated to pay you that amount on the BRBC. And it's up to you to figure out that gap, because if you're willing to take a very low amount to get in that house, that's on you. But see, and we, we know this is more difficult. There's more friction involved, etc., because we're now doing with the buyers what we did with the sellers. And it's also, it's compensation is discussed in 3 different places: with the listing agreement with the seller, the buyer broker agreement with the buyer, and at the contract, where they're negotiating how much the seller is going to pay. Where before it's just one.
This is gonna make appraisers nuts, I think.
Yeah.
I think that
And here's my hope, because I'll say this, in Austin real estate, I did real estate there for a long time. And the appraisers were very adamant about seller concessions, because when you provide a buyer credit, $5,000, so they don't in lieu of repairs or towards closing costs, et cetera, they would subtract. They were adamant on that. They would subtract that from the value. Others might have the opinion that, hey, we want to add those concessions because that's really what the buyer paid for the property. I don't know what the opinion is going to be in the appraisal community, but over time, it may be modified a little bit, because the buyer is really paying that amount.
that's what they're willing to
Price
pay.
plus commission.
I mean, that's in my judgment, right? It's
Yeah.
like, if the value of the house is what the buyer is willing to pay, and that's what's on the contract plus their buyer commission, that's the value of the house.
Exactly, Mark. Yeah, and but the appraiser community, I don't know that they've modified to that kind of thinking yet, but it's really how it's always worked, because the sale price of the house has always included both sides of commission, right? Always.
Right.
This MLS rule doesn't apply to appraiser. The appraiser can give a rat's ass about it. And they just want to see what the closing price was, and whether they're going to eventually put that in there. If they do, it'd be great. It would be great. Because you got to explain to the buyer, you've always paid the commission, you've always financed it. It's just, they're just breaking it apart. That's all. Because they want to make sure that you're clear on everything. Everybody has full clarity. That's the only difference between now and, before August 13th.
And I have a question too,
All right.
but I have a question too, maybe a little late, but so I have an understanding that if you have an agreement for 2.5% with your client and then the seller's offering say 3%, that extra 0.5 just goes back to the seller, correct?
Yeah.
And then but would it be possible for you to try maybe the buyer to just get that extra 0.5%, right? Because if you can't get it, I'd be happy with my client.
Yes. But you have to, you're going to see that in a minute. And the modification, you just modify the buyer broker agreement for a different amount. That's all. You can modify it up, you can modify it down. You have a conversation with that buyer. A lot of times the buyer, hey, the seller, good news. I know you and I agreed to 2.5%. I know it took us 3 days of struggling to get to that point because you didn't want to pay anything. Thank you for that. But the seller's going to offer 3%. Sign this document so I get an extra 0.5%. Some buyers are going to go, wait a minute. Whoa, I want that credit. Okay. Or the buyer might go, how about we split it? There's different ways to do it. But yeah, you can modify any document, you can pretty much modify. As long as it's a term that's modified and it's not the promulgated legal language.
So you just modify the agreement and then you just negotiate whatever with your client about that extra 0.5.
Yeah. And that's in the old buyer broker agreement too, by the way. That none of us used, but it was there. Okay, let's keep going. So SPBB, which is seller pays broker, basically seller pays buyer broker directly versus concessions. What if they sign it for 2.5% and there is, and they agree, you counted in there, but you're trying to slip it by. And because you don't have a buyer broker agreement, you got a stubborn client who says, you want to show me this house or not? You figure it out. And then the seller says, I'll agree to 2.5%, but no active BRBC. What if that happens?
They're not obligated to pay.
Absolutely. Even if it's signed, they do not have to pay. So the seller is paid to save 2.5%. You're out. And if a buyer wants to write an offer on my listing, but wants no representation, what if that happens?
Hopefully I've put some dollar amount in my listing agreement for unrepresented buyers. And then would there be a I was going to say, there's got to be a non-agency agreement that goes with it.
You hit it on the head. Non-agency agreement goes with it. It says, I'm not representing you, so you can't get at me for, but then you complete C2 on the residential listing, which is exactly what you said, which is compensation for a non-represented buyer. This doesn't happen often, but when it happens, you don't want to be going, how do I do this? You don't. Now, if you have a buyer that comes into your listing and wants to write an offer on your listing and they're willing to be represented, your sellers have to know that if that happens, dual agency, that's good news, right? But I'm going to be negotiating for a commission and I work for 3%. Let them have those conversations early. Don't come back in the middle of the offer and have this, they may still have a different point of view in the middle of the offer, but at least you've covered it already. Proactive is a big deal. Okay. What can you say about commissions and agent remarks?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah, do not test it. Do not test it. What can you say about seller concessions in private remarks?
Seller open to seller
They're
concession.
willing to consider them.
As long as it has nothing to do with commission.
Yeah, exactly. You can word it how you word it. I mean, I come up with some standard language with their permission, of course. You can state that they'll consider concessions to the buyer. Do not say it's for commission. Just keep commission out of there. Even don't try to game the system and come up with some tricky way like, hey, we cooperate with buyer agents and add that sentence. Just don't do it. We don't want to be the pioneers in getting fines from the MLS.
So is this a way really for agents to talk to each other through the remarks saying like, there's obviously going to be a compensation? Or
Yeah, if you're gonna show a property, you always look at the agent remarks, right? See, hey, what's going on that the public isn't gonna know about? And as
It
it
is
now,
amazing. It is amazing how many agents call me with questions that I have specifically addressed in the private remarks and they just didn't read them.
no, that drives me nuts.
Don't be a bad buyer's agent and not read the private remarks.
You know what, Mark? And that's exactly why, if you're a newer agent, why when you make a phone call to a listing agent who's been around a long time and done a lot of listings, why they're gonna be a little bit grumpy. Because that happens over and over again. They say, just read the remarks. Okay. Can you write in how much concession the seller is willing to offer?
No.
Okay, we got to know. Anybody else have an opinion?
We all said no.
Yes, you can, as long
Said
as they
no.
provide permission in writing. It still has to state seller is willing to consider concessions up to 2.5%. If the seller the seller has provided in writing, hopefully through that little box we talked about on the MLSA. Remember that? If you don't remember it, go back to the MLSA. And they provide a written permission. If that written permission is better to be on an addendum, because that just makes
Do
it
it
hard.
on an addendum.
No questions.
So you can put that in private remarks,
If
but
you
it's
have
as a
permission from the seller.
concession, as
Yeah.
long as it's in writing.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yes.
Seller's willing to consider concessions up to 2.5%.
Or just if they don't provide that thing and they say, yeah, you can say it, but don't say how much, because I want to keep my hand. I don't want them to see my hand.
Got it.
Card hand.
The hope is that becomes common practice.
Exactly. Yeah. So you'll see all these different strategies that everybody thinks are the great ones that'll come up, but just be comfortable with how you do it. Or how your sellers. Okay, if the agent remarks, let's say it says, all right, very specifically, you got all this permission. The seller will pay 3% in seller concessions. It's in the remarks. You print up the MLS sheets, it's right there. Is the seller obligated to pay 3%?
No,
Why? Why would you
it's
say
all
no?
negotiable. And if the co-op amount is 2.5%, but maybe they're willing to consider 0.5%. But again, if they come in with a lowball offer, well, I'm not giving up 3% when you try to give me a 10% haircut on the price.
Yeah, but here's the thing. It's just a flat no. The reason it's no, what if the seller says in the MLS remarks, the portable spa stays, and then you close escrow and this portable spa is gone? Does the seller have to return it?
Not if it wasn't included in personal property
On the contract, right?
on the contract.
Same with this. Even if it says in the MLS is just somebody writing down what they might do. It is
Gotta be in the
not
contract.
considered part of the contract. So even if they say seller will pay 3% in seller concessions, they shouldn't say that, but if they did, they're not obligated to do so unless it's on the contract. Remember that. If you remember just that, it might save you some money later on. How does a buyer negotiate for the seller to pay their commission? There's two ways. How do they negotiate for that?
They ask for it in the offer.
Where?
I can't remember exactly where it's at, but it's in the terms.
Okay.
You can appeal directly to the seller too.
In what means do you ask? There's two different ways. One we've been talking about for a while already.
One is concessions, asking
Yes.
just for a general concession.
Credit. So they call it seller credit.
Credit,
On the
right.
What's the
Credit.
second way? What's the second one? This will be used a lot, I think, the second one.
SPBB.
Yes. What does that mean? SPBB.
Seller pays buyer broker.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the reason that might be used, let's say the buyer wants to reserve any potential credits because this house is a real fixer. And I'm taking it as is, but I don't know. I want to reserve and my lender's only going to allow me to get 3% based on the kind of loan I have in credits. And if I do all my credits for commission, I have nothing left. So I want to save those in case I need to use it. You might basically teach, counseled them on this too. So let's do the SPBB. It doesn't, you know, you're just gonna pay the buyer broker directly on the contract. And if I need credits later, I can use them. So be careful of that. Be aware of that is a better way to say it.
Brilliant.
All right, sorry, we're not done just yet. If seller agrees to 2%, your BRBC states 3%. What are your options?
Negotiate from the seller for more for that extra percent.
Yeah, absolutely. But if they just says 2%, that's my bottom line. You're not gonna get any more. Take it or leave it, walk away. The buyer, his option is the buyer can pay the additional 1%, just like on an appraisal. Doesn't appraise, the buyer really wants the house, has the cash. God, I just gotta have that house. I want it. Okay, I'll pay the 1%. I'll pay the extra appraisal money. That happens. Or you can do a modification of terms if it turns out to that, if they don't have the money to reduce it to 2%. But that they have to jive. You can't close an escrow with a 3% BRBC and a 2% payout, because now you've got a conflict on your contract. But if you have to do a modification.
It's got a balance.
Yeah. What if the seller offers more? We've been talking about this, more money than the BRBC states.
Modify it. Modify the BRBC.
But be careful when you do that. First of all, make sure the buyer agrees with this. They may not.
Right.
I've seen it where they haven't, and I've had questions, people, okay? And only modify it for that transaction only, because if this falls through, you don't see what I'm saying?
Right.
You want the buyer to feel comfortable that the next one we'll just take it from scratch and go.
Mike, I got a question.
Yeah.
So, if the seller's offering more than the BRBC states, just as a gesture of goodwill, could you take, let's say they offer 3% and you're charging 2.5%. Can you take that 0.5% and put it towards your buyer's closing costs? If you wanted to.
You could take the 3% as it, because if it's going to be a credit, the buyer can use it any way they want. They can use 2.5 for you and 0.5% for the commission. I mean, there's different ways to do it as long as it's on the contract. But if you're saying if it's 3%, you got an agreement for 2.5%. Now, the seller's going to want to see that BRBC though. They may say, "Whoa, wait a minute! I'm going to modify that because I don't have to give you 3%." Especially if you're using the SPBB. Now, if it's for buyer credits, that's a different story. That goes back to where maybe it's an advantage there to use buyer credits, because the buyer credits can be used for anything, including commission. You know what I'm saying? The SPBB could only be used for commission.
So
in the case that you get 2.5%, you see the BRBC and the seller is offering 3%. Then when you sign, your seller agrees to the terms, wouldn't you automatically have them also sign the MTBR at that time? To just modify it to 2.5% for this one transaction?
Yeah, you can do that. Because the sellers are going to want to, you know, if it's co-op commission, if you're using our form, let's say you got an offer with one of our agents here, and they're offering co-op commission of 3% on our co-op form, they're only obligated to pay what your BRBC states on that co-op. They're going to want to see it. If that's the situation, that's the situation. Okay. Unless the, you know, the sellers are probably going to say, no, you guys got a contract for that. I'm only going to pay that. And then the 0.5% goes back to the seller. But if the seller is willing to offer concessions or a SPBB of 3%, you know, usually they're going to find out what your BRBC is before they even touch
Mute
that
Paul.
amount. Somebody's got a thing going on. Okay, there we go. You see what I'm saying? The forms have to jive. And the way you've got elbow room is using the seller credits towards closing costs, which would include commission. In that case, the seller probably doesn't even want, may or may not want to see the buyer broker agreement. They're saying, I'll give you 3%, and I don't care how you use it, repairs, and you can take the house as is. That'll happen too.
This is going to be interesting to see how a lot of the discount agents in Salinas respond when they've been offering 1 and 1.5 and 2% as co-op. But now when they're on the buyer side, what are they going to try to ask for? when they've got to represent a buyer? Are they gonna still ask for 2? Or are they gonna ask for 2.5? Or are they gonna ask for 1.5? It's gonna be interesting to see how some of these turkeys deal with that.
Yeah, and I'm gonna guess that a lot of those brokerages are not gonna have co-op at all. They're just gonna ignore that. They're not gonna provide that option. We happen to have attorneys who decided to help us out and draw some forms up that were vetted. But we may be one of the few that actually do this right now. And this may actually phase out at some point where it's like, it's we don't know how this whole process is going to mature. We don't know what it's going to turn into. We just know this is where we're starting. It's like a bunch of people at the starting point of a race, and it's like we don't know who's going to pull out from the pack and who's going to finish, who's not. But in this case, it's going to morph into something new. And you're going to see from what I've heard so far with the listing agents is the sellers are fine offering, I'll pay a concession. I don't care. We'll just keep doing it. I just want to sell my house. Keep in mind the sellers, they always want to sell their house. They always want to move. They always want the money. That's the way that's not changing at all. There's that motivation. I want to sell my house. What is it going to take to sell it? They've always paid 5 or 6%, right? The buyers, they want to buy a house. They don't want to be haggling with commissions and stuff. They want get that out of the way. And I want to buy that house. Now the buyers, it's going to be one more step because they're negotiating for commission in most cases through the credits or the SBBB. But it's like the smart listing agents, I think, are going to counsel their sellers. Go ahead and you hold firm to what you're going to offer. If it's 2.5%, whatever that is, but just work with the price and the bottom line. Don't try to counter back for another % less on the commission. Try to go with another % more on the price when you're doing your counters. So you got, and this, we're going to clearly see the sellers, I think, are the ones that are going to need more counseling even than the buyers. And you really, if you're not doing it now, work with the net sheet. Always have a net sheet in front of you. And we've got one in the MLS. The title companies are usually, some of the title companies actually have a link where you can just fill it out as you go. The only things that won't include, because you won't have it probably, are the notes on the houses and the liens. But just say, okay, factor that out. This is what you're going to get bottom line. If you raise the price by this is your bottom line. If you lower the commission by this, it's the same bottom line as raising the price. But just have the options. And we're using a lot of words and sentences and essays today in our conversation, but it's going to boil down to understanding the system, understanding all of the different options, the different tools, if you will, understand and be so familiar with it when something comes up, you know which tool to use. And yeah, we're all starting with scratch, right? And I've tried for me, if I see something new like this, I dumb it down. If I can explain it to grandma. And every single piece, every single option, you got to be able to explain it to grandma. And she's going to go, oh, I see. Oh, yeah. That's the trick to anything new, because nothing has changed with the math in most cases. That's where we got to get. And if you're reading social media on these little sites like real estate, this and that, ignore it. You have people, the things are going to fall apart. Oh my God, people got a whole new thing coming. Ignore that. You got a bunch of people that probably do 2 deals a year that are giving their opinions. Okay. All right. That's my digression. All right. So where in the residential listing agreement now does it authorize you to offer concessions via the MLS?
Doesn't.
It doesn't authorize that.
You sure?
Nowhere in the MLS can it be advertised. Oh, for concessions, actually.
Concessions. Talking about concessions.
Technically,
It's a
under
box
other
you need to
terms,
check to get the MTLA form.
You got
Isn't
it.
there an addendum?
Good job. No, it's included. It's called Form MLSA. It's part of the listing agreement. It's a 2-page document that there's some stuff you got to fill out. We went over this earlier. It doesn't have a field for how much, nor does it commit the seller to actually paying it, but it infers the seller is going to consider it. But make sure you have that box checked if you're going to put it in the MLS that sellers willing to consider offers or willing to consider buyer concessions with an amount or without an amount, depending on the permission you receive. Okay. On the BRBC, what's a continuation period? What does that mean?
The safety clause.
Which means what?
Certain amount of time after you're given written notice of the cancellation to BRBC, in case they go with another agent and they get involved with a property that you were involved with.
Perfect.
Or if it expires.
Rights to compensation after expiration or cancellation. Why, on your BRBC, why would a buyer exclude certain properties from representation? There's a space on there for it. Why would they do that?
If they're already in an agreement.
Previous agreement.
And cover with a continuation on a different one. Or they may just want, they've already been talking to that owner. Maybe it's a FSBO, and they don't want any commission anywhere, and neither is the FSBO, so the FSBO and then work it out. It rarely happens, but it does. So there's different reasons for it. Always ask why. I mean, there's no harm in asking, oh, well, tell me about those property. What's considered broker involvement?
Some sort of activity where you're actively involved in getting information, showing, obviously, but some amount of effort is expended to help the buyer understand the property.
Yep, on that specific property. Right. That's pretty much it. Is it considered broker involvement if I have a buyer set up on this auto email thing? Even if I get copies of it and look at it, I just provide them regular list of properties from my MLS account. Is that considered broker involvement?
No.
Simple no, it's not. What if the seller doesn't agree to pay the buy side commission? Said, no way, no how, that's it. And the buyer doesn't have the funds to pay me. What are my options?
You can either not write an offer on the property or just not get paid.
Yeah, you're not obligated to represent the buyer. You know, you don't want to have to write a check to close an escrow that you're working on. What's the difference in rights to compensation between an exclusive and a non-exclusive relationship on the BRBC?
Well, I mean, if you have an exclusive, you have that 30-day extension, continuation period, and they're also obligated to pay you in case they write an offer on a house you showed on an unexclusive, you have none of those options.
Yeah, well, simplify. If it's an exclusive, you're paid whether or not you represented the buyer in a closed transaction. If any property they buy during your time that you have that BRBC, you're going to get paid, just like an exclusive listing agreement. But if it's the continuation period, you have to have had broker involvement. Non-exclusive, you have to have had broker involvement even during the time of your BRBC. That's why some buyers are going to have multiple buyer rep agreements. Okay. What forms must I provide an open house visitor?
The OHNA.
Yeah. Well, it depends, actually. If they're looking around and without interest, or they already have an agent, have them sign into the OHNA. It's not required, by the way, but it's very helpful. Tells them it's very advisable, if you will. If they want to write an offer, then do the PSRA or the BRBC. Okay. Okay, home stretch, home stretch, home stretch. What's the new form for sellers who are signed up with the pre-July, like the old RLA?
The DM RLA, the modification disclosure.
You got it. DMLA. It's critical. What's the purpose of it?
Modifications that were made.
To bring the old listing agreement into alignment with the new listing agreement. Compliance.
That's it. That's exactly it. What do I need to do with it? Right now, what do you need to do?
Send it over and have them sign it.
Yeah. Anyone, however, if they're under contract to close before August 12th, you don't need it. But what if one of my under contracts scheduled to close next week falls out of contract? Do I need one?
Yes.
Yes.
You do. Make sure before going active again, make sure.
I missed the call earlier by like.
And what does it disclose to the seller?
I have the order.
Compensation.
The lawsuit and co-op commission is going away. And what it changes is the total commission is going to be reduced by the agreed upon co-op offering. So if you had a 5% with 2.5 co-op, now your commission is 2.5%. You got to start over again. If you want to continue with co-op, do the new form. If you want to do it the new way, then you don't do the new form. How about buyers who are signed up with the pre-July 24th BRBC?
There's be a modification.
Same thing, DMB, except it's called DMBR and it provides parity with the pre-July 24th. Okay. Okay. And thanks for your patience today. I know there's a lot of information to cover. And I see some of our Zoomies have already, gotten their last cup of coffee. But is there any questions that we haven't answered today in this stuff? Everybody got it? Okay. So know this stuff. It's coming up. You're going to get reminders, but just know it. And I think we're going to be just fine.